On the afternoon of March 25, 1911, New York City believed it was witnessing just another Saturday drifting toward evening. The sidewalks around Washington Square buzzed with ordinary life. Streetcars rattled, shop windows gleamed, and families hurried home before supper. Then, without warning, people looked up. From the upper floors of a 10-story building, black smoke poured into the blue sky. Seconds later, something far more horrifying followed. Bodies began to fall. The Ash Building, a modern steel and stone structure at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street, housed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on its top 3 floors. Inside worked hundreds of young immigrant women, mostly Jewish and Italian, many barely in their teens, bent over sewing machines, stitching fashionable blouses called shirtwaists that symbolized the modern American woman. They were fast, skilled, and relentlessly supervised. By the end of that day, 146 of them would be dead. The fire started shortly before closing time, around 4:40 p.m., on the 8th floor. The exact cause was never conclusively proven, but investigators believed a discarded cigarette or match ignited a pile of fabric scraps beneath a cutting table. In a factory filled with cotton, tissue paper patterns, and wooden tables soaked in machine oil, the flames raced like a living thing. Within minutes, the room was an inferno. The workers noticed the fire almost immediately, but the factory's layout turned panic into catastrophe. One exit door was locked. Owners Max Blank and Isaac Harris had ordered it kept that way to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks. When women ran for it, they found it immovable. Another door opened inward, making it nearly impossible to push through against a crowd surging to escape. The single, narrow fire escape outside twisted under heat and weight before collapsing entirely, sending workers plunging to the alley below. There were elevators, but they could only carry a few people at a time. Elevator operators made desperate trips upward, loading terrified women until the cars could take no more. Some workers leaped into the shafts, hoping to land on top of the elevator roof. Many missed. Others were crushed as bodies piled up in the darkness. On the 9th floor, where managers worked and conditions were slightly better, a phone call from the 8th floor warned of the fire. There was no such warning for the 10th floor. Those workers only realized the danger when smoke curled under doors and flames burst through windows below them. They rushed to the roof, where students from New York University, whose building was next door, lowered ladders across the gap. That improvised bridge saved dozens of lives.
Down on the street, a crowd gathered in disbelief. Fire engines arrived quickly, but their ladders reached only the 6th floor, far below the flames. Firefighters unfurled nets, but the nets tore apart under the force of falling bodies. One after another, young women jumped, their dresses catching fire as they fell. Witnesses later described the sound not as screams, but as a series of dull, unbearable thuds. The fire burned for less than half an hour. By the time it was extinguished, the sidewalk was littered with bodies, twisted metal, and scorched fabric drifting like snow. Morgues overflowed. Families searched for missing daughters by walking past rows of unclaimed corpses, identifying them by shoes, jewelry, or a familiar braid of hair. Many victims were so badly burned they could only be identified by dental records, or not at all. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was not America's deadliest workplace disaster, but it became its most influential. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Newspapers printed graphic descriptions and photographs. Funeral processions stretched for miles, and an estimated 400,000 people marched in silent protest through the rain. The outrage cut across class lines, uniting social reformers, labor activists, and ordinary citizens who could no longer ignore the human cost of industrial progress.
At the center of the storm were Blank and Harris. They had escaped to the roof early in the fire and survived. When charged with manslaughter, they argued that they had no knowledge the doors were locked at the time. In a trial that stunned the public, the jury acquitted them. The standard of proof that they knowingly locked the doors could not be met beyond a reasonable doubt. Later, in a civil suit, they paid damages of $75 per victim's family. Their insurance payout exceeded what they paid in compensation. If justice failed in the courtroom, it surged elsewhere. New York State launched the Factory Investigation Commission, led by reformers who refused to let the tragedy fade. One of them was Frances Perkins, a social worker who witnessed the fire firsthand. She would later become the U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the first woman to hold a cabinet position, and she often said that the New Deal began on the day of the Triangle Fire. The commission conducted exhaustive investigations, inspecting factories, interviewing workers, and documenting conditions that had long been accepted as normal. The findings were damning. Locked exits, overcrowded floors, lack of fire drills, non-existent sprinkler systems, and managers who valued productivity over human life. In response, New York passed a sweeping set of labor laws, more than 30 new regulations covering fire safety, building codes, working hours, sanitation, and child labor. These reforms did not remain confined to one state. They became models for labor protections across the United States. Fire drills became mandatory. Doors were required to open outward and remain unlocked during work hours. Sprinkler systems were installed in high-rise factories. For the first time, the government asserted that it had not just the right, but the responsibility to protect workers from exploitation and danger.
The victims of the Triangle Fire were mostly poor young women who had come to America chasing the promise etched into the national imagination. Many had survived pogroms, famine, and ocean crossings, only to die in a locked factory in the world's richest city. Yet their deaths forced a reckoning that reshaped American labor forever. Today, the Ash Building still stands, now part of New York University and designated a National Historic Landmark. On its walls, plaques bear the names of the dead. Every year on March 25th, people gather to read those names aloud, placing flowers and chalking hearts on the sidewalks where bodies once fell. It is a ritual of memory and warning. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire exposed a brutal truth. Progress without humanity is just another form of cruelty. In less than 30 minutes, 146 lives were erased, but their absence carved laws, rights, and protections into the structure of modern America. The sky filled with ash that day, but from it rose a demand that has never fully faded, that no job, no profit, and no convenience is worth a human life.